A motion to go into executive session, please.
Second.
All those in favor?
John, keep Doug out of trouble while we're there.
Why not? Okay.
Break dance on the table.
That's all right.
You want the lamp change too, or something?
Yeah, I just say.
We're gonna talk about the marijuana ordinance and all right, folks.
And then we do it.
Okay.
I'll speak with Jeff for that.
Sorry about that. It took a little longer than we anticipated. We just have a few more public session motion to discuss with the attorney with, and then we'll move on to the next thing on our list.
Okay, so we're going to talk about TIF and the proposed marijuana ordinance amendments.
Yep.
If I do it too first, or do you want
So
We can take first.
I sent the town attorney some questions from Doug Phillips, as well as Chris's questions about home rule and whether or not we could limit caregiver businesses or grow operations that fall within the 500 square foot mature growth threshold. Did that come across? Did you?
Yeah, I understand the question.
Okay, so I guess I'd pass it off to you as far as what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, so some of the specific questions, first one that comes to mind was, can we limit the number of caregivers or caregiver grows? And the answer to that one is simple. The statute says no, can't limit their numbers. It does say that you can regulate them. So that means everything from you can zone them, you can require licenses, you can require, code enforcement officer or planning board reviews of new establishments. You can treat them the same as any other marijuana business in that respect. You just cannot prohibit them or regulate their numbers. And then there was, also there were a lot of caregivers that were already in business when all of the cannabis laws were passed. And so there's pretty strong grandfathering that applies to all of those existing businesses. And then there's a lot more latitude for any new business. In terms of, so just going back in time to the cultivation facility ordinance, which I drafted, the big concern at the time was bigger buildings that were either one person's large scale grow, or more commonly these sort of condominium style deals where individual caregivers are in the same building, each with their own space. And what the aggregate of that looks like, because if we are not licensing or regulating caregivers, we don't want that cumulative effect of a whole bunch of them in the same space unregulated. So we did that cultivation facility ordinance that was intended to kind of capture that. But we did exempt any property that had under 1,000 square feet of canopy grow in it. And we can absolutely regulate those facilities. We would just need to sort of specify that and find out in which way we want to regulate them. Do we want the planning board to look at them? Are we thinking more about licensing at this point? Lots of options, but we can't prohibit them, and caregivers are allowed to have up to 1,000 square feet of canopy by law.
I would at least allow you, what she says, to at least track to know who's there, be able to make sure somebody isn't there, that they comply. I should think that takes one of the loopholes out.
Your comment on well, that answered my question. I know that Doug, you wanted. Are you satisfied with that response from the attorney, or did you want to comment further?
If I could ask a question. First of all, our ordinance was passed and grandfathered anything that existed in legal operation, but it specifically prevents anything from happening after the new businesses after. So that kind of concerns me about the caregivers. Just I think the attorney just mentioned something about you can't really limit the number of caregivers in town, but yet the ordinance says they had to be in existence when you pass the ordinance. So there's something there that just doesn't. The ordinance says no, you can't. The hearing, you can't limit.
So the ordinance, again, the ordinance only governs the cultivation facilities, and it allows the ones that were in business before adoption of the ordinance, but it doesn't say anything about individual caregivers. So it's neither grandfathering them nor prohibiting them.
They wouldn't be operating in a large facility, presumably an individual caregiver is gonna be, what is that? Person going for their own use or their own family.
They may or may not be operating in a large facility. So a lot of what I'm calling individual caregivers, it's not a caregiver retail store where they're, putting out a sign and the public can walk in, but they are growing, they might be manufacturing, and they might be seeing patients. And they could be doing that out of their home, they could be doing that in an office, or they could be doing it out of one of these, multi-tiered facilities where there are lots of caregivers operating in the same space. So, but at the end of the day, their use is described as their medical marijuana caregiver.
Are they considered commercial if they're business?
For what purpose?
For regulation in town, following under the ordinance?
They're treated as a separate type of use. We've listed that as a kind of use, and it's a special ordinance, of course. But I mean, like in terms of personal property tax, in theory, you could treat them as business, etc.
But we have a site limit.
Yeah.
For commercial, so they would be a commercial.
Well, it's killing me. I'm trying to pull up the ordinance to double check on this, but I believe the way that the ordinance works is that it just specifically names cultivation facility and then requires cultivation facilities to get site plan review. So there's sort of a crossover between those provisions. But they're not required to get site plan review because they're commercial. They're required to get site plan review because they're a cultivation facility. And then the caregivers are exempted from that if they're under 1,000 square feet. So then they don't need site plan review.
And we're making the recommendation that we require them to get site plan review in the new ordinance.
So one more, to the 1,000 square feet, that applies to the cultivation facility, but I think you also said that the town can regulate businesses, and does that mean that they can regulate smaller businesses?
Yes.
The homegrown things like that,
Yeah, I'd say
for the purpose of license.
one of the other questions that was asked was, are any other towns doing planning board review, for instance, of caregivers? Generally, no, is the answer to that. But there are loads of towns that have comprehensive licensing ordinances that require caregivers and everybody else to be licensed. Some exempt caregivers from that too, but it's definitely not uncommon to do that. And a lot of towns have looked at this as just, we have to spend money to regulate these things. Caregiver facilities, may cause just as many issues as caregiver stores or big cultivation facilities. So they should be contributing into the pot of, their license fee money that goes to the overall regulatory system.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. So how about the odor control? Is that an issue? I mean, before we had pretty strict on that. You smell it, we shut you down. You got sick for that.
If you add caregivers to the list, they've got to follow all the same requirements as anybody else. So that would mean odor control and security and all the other stuff we have in place for the other type.
I don't want to waste your time, Mr. Mitchell, Mr. LaCroix. So we got a little bit behind, so we'll try to get to you as soon as we can.
No problem.
So are we satisfied, Doug, on the marijuana questions? Okay. You want to move to TIF?
Sure. So LD 286, considering that there's some changes, the legislature allow 50% of TIF funds to be used for buildings with their tied to economic development. We've knocked this around a couple times. The thought is that really, in speaking with Kristin's colleague Emily White, basically what we're looking at is the question is how do you envision using these funds, that kind of thing. Their advice to me was to just kind of like hold off on making any changes with the TIF ordinance, because until that fundamental question is answered, do we want to be investing time and money in something to move forward with it? Is that the gist of our discussion?
The first thing to be clear about is we don't have a TIF ordinance per se. We have a TIF district that's described in a development program that was adopted by the voters. So we can call it an ordinance for shorthand, but it's, and I mean, the law does not require us to have an ordinance or to amend an ordinance if we have one. What we'd really be doing is amending the TIF program to say, and you can use it for these purposes. So our thought was, if we don't have a particular need for it right now, there is the ability to amend that TIF district whenever the need arises. And we can be at the time, if we know more what we're doing, we can amend it more carefully to describe, like, you can change a TIF in a lot of ways. For instance, we could change the parameters of the district. We could change the description of its purpose or its intention, and we can change the way it's being used. And so I think the idea was, if circumstances change and we want to be able to use the TIF funds for this reason, then let's just do it at the time rather than spend the legal fees now and then maybe have to change it again later.
Any thoughts, Mike? This is
How
your,
long does it take when you want to?
Well, that's
Currently, there are 6 allowable uses.
Yeah.
And I've been beating this drum for 6 years now.
well, that takes me back to my Vassalboro pet peeve of not being able to have special town meetings, which actually was something we were going to put on the list, I think, Aaron. If you were able to do a special town meeting, you can get it done in a month.
By being a TIF.
Yeah,
And
because it's just at the end of the day, it needs to go through a town meeting and the change needs to be approved by DECD. But if you have to wait till an annual town meeting, that's the pinch point there. So the thing was, when we were talking about this, if we had a capital program that, we want to build a new fire safety building or a new town hall or this something, and we knew that was coming down the pike in a couple of years, it would make a lot of sense to do it now. But it sounds like there's nothing right now that's specifically on the wish list.
would have been focused on remodeling the transfer station and counting on possibly using the TIF funds to offset the cost.
Yeah, and Emily, and we were talking about that. So you also still have to tie it back to economic development. And so we'd have to, with the transfer station, make the case that economic development requires the improvement to the transfer station, or that you're doing it to attract business, which is kind of hard on the transfer station.
Fair enough. Satisfied, Mike?
Really?
Well, we can work on special town meeting and you can turn around a special town meeting pretty quick. So if you find that you want to, you have a use for it, then we can get going on that.
Couple of it's need to pretty substantial that's happened to us.
Take care.
Let's see.
DPW, I think, is easier to make the case for economic development. We need to do something there.
So we plan, we'll start working on focusing on.
I'm sorry, you said Department of Public Works? Oh, interesting.
Special meeting.
Plenty in public works. That was.
Yes. All right. Anything else?
Nope. Does the DECD approval have to happen in the follow-up recommendations derived from the town meeting?
So I think technically it happens after town meeting, but we would always put it by them first before we waste the time essentially with the vote. If it's going to be approved.
Appreciate your time, Ms. Collins.
All set with me?
Yes, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to, we have Chris Mitchell, the Executive Director formerly now. Excellent. Delta Ambulance to discuss the upcoming budget request. Do you want to start or you?
So no, not really. Chris has been going from town to town and talking to them about, a number of changes that are expected and costs and that kind of thing. We wanted to invite Chris here because there were some questions. Really wanted to invite you here for these discussions about, what's happening, some of the changes at Delta.
Sure.
So I'll let you just take it from there, Chris.
Okay.
I know.
Feel free to rein me in because I'll go off on a tangent.
I will, yeah. You.
Me get some numbers up here. So I've been officially the executive director now for about 31 hours. Been in the acting capacity since mid-October. Tim Beals announced his resignation at the beginning of October, so I've sort of stepped into that role since then. So for anyone not familiar, just a quick background on Delta. So Delta was formed back in 1972. 3 hospitals, 13 seat board of directors. Currently, that board of directors is made up of 8 hospital seats. So 4 from Northern Light Inland and 4 from Maine General. And then the remaining are community seats, which are currently 3 are occupied at the moment. Hopefully, 4 soon. There's really 1 more open. We cover 13 towns, about 520 square miles, give or take. And kind of the reason for our increase, I'll kind of skip through a lot of this because, like I said, I can go on for a little while if you let me. So over the past, the past several years, we've been operating in a budget deficit. Over the last probably 4 to 5 years, the deficit's gotten very significant, and it's to the point where we can no longer sustain the deficit anymore. Last year, we were looking at about roughly a $3 million gap between operating costs and revenue. And that was probably the worst year I think we've had in the last couple of years, but that trend has been steadily increasing over the past few years. There's a lot of reasons for that. So back in, it was 2019 and then 2020, we lost a fairly significant portion of our call volume with 2 towns that we lost. So losing the income from those 2 towns, we weren't charging any subsidies at this point. So losing the income from those 2 towns was a pretty significant hit to our call volume. Right after that, or actually right during all this, was when the COVID pandemic started, which had pretty drastic effects on everything. Our costs skyrocketed, most of that driven by payroll. Part of the reason was, as a private service or not-for-profit service, we always experience a normal level of attrition with our providers. We get people that come into work for us for a couple of years, then they go on to do nursing school or PA school, or some police officers, firefighters, but we don't retain a lot of people, and that's been pretty standard for as long as I can remember. The thing that changed with the pandemic was, as we were losing people, we stopped getting people coming back into backfilling. People weren't just generally as interested in the field. We actually had a little bit higher number of people leaving due to a lot of the reasons directly surrounding the pandemic, but then the school stopped putting people through the programs. A lot of the local schools shut down. And if the schools are still operating, they couldn't get their students into clinical sites. So basically all the incoming people to our company came to a screeching halt. So prior to the pandemic, everyone was already kind of collectively at sort of a tipping point. And with the start of the pandemic, a lot of the services, including Delta, were sort of pushed over that point where staffing became a major problem, which drove every service in the state to compete for retention and hiring. So everyone around the state over the last few years has been in this progressively worsening wage war, where our wages that started, I think we were down in teens. For a paramedic, our current average rate for a paramedic is now just over $30 an hour. And that's pretty standard across the field. So during this time also, if we go back about 10 years or so, Delta was one sized. I think we had about 120, 130 people on payroll. A good portion of those were per diem employees. We're currently at 80, and that's including per diem, full-timers, administration, dispatches, everything. So despite losing a really significant portion of our roster, our payroll has actually climbed a tad over the last few years, and that's a direct reflection of the wage increases that we've had to do just to retain that staff. While this was all going on, insurance costs went up. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the same problems. Insurance costs went up, fuel costs went up, everything just climbed. And as an ambulance service, we're primarily dependent on billing for transports. So the way ambulance billing works, and this is the way every ambulance service works, not just Delta, we can only bill based on 2 things. We can bill based on what they call a base rate and the mileage. So when we're going to a scene, we don't bill for the response to the scene, whatever the time and distance is. We don't get any money for that. If we pick the patient up and we bring them to the hospital, that's when we can bill for it. So the reason why that's significant is because about 25 to 30% of the calls that we respond to, we don't transport, so we can't bill for those. The ones we do bill for, because the way insurance works, and the way insurance payment and reimbursement, everything works, we end up writing off a little over half of what we actually bill for each year. That number is fairly consistent town to town. And if you look at our entire operating budget, which includes transfers and 911, that pretty much holds true no matter where you go. So I think it's about 52% of what we bill for ends up getting written off. So if we bill for $8 million, we see about $4 million on it. Unfortunately, that doesn't cover anyone's operating budget. There was actually a Blue Ribbon Commission that went into effect a couple of years ago. They did a statewide analysis that included transporting and non-transporting services across the state of Maine. Focus was on transporting services. And the takeaway conclusion from there, the statement that I remember was no service can survive right now, without a subsidy. So basically, all transporting services right now are dependent on a balance between subsidy and call volume, because even at the most efficient state that you can get to is, by transporting with one ambulance, you'll never reach break even point. And as far as efficiency with an ambulance goes, so one ambulance takes a paramedic level ambulance is around $1 million a year to run, give or take, and that's a generally accepted number through the industry. But it takes a little over, I think it's about 2,100. The numbers climbed over the last couple of years, but I think it's about 2,100 calls for that one ambulance to reach the most efficient state that it can get to. The problem is that doesn't always reflect reality, because when you're only talking 50 calls in a year, the chances are that those calls won't overlap. You can usually handle that volume with one truck. As you climb up into the thousands and you get above 2,000, the chances are a lot higher that you're going to have overlapping calls and simultaneous calls, and you need a second truck. So as soon as you add that second truck, your efficiency drops again. You kind of start from the bottom. But at no point do you actually crest that break-even point, and that's where the subsidies sort of come in. So the Blue Ribbon Commission made this determination after looking at everything over the last few years. And they actually recommended to the Maine State Legislature that it was going to take, for transporting services, they were recommending $70 million each year for the next 5 years, to basically buoy all the transporting services enough to kind of get them to a break-even point and allow insurance reimbursement legislation to catch up to where things need to be. That didn't happen. The legislature approved a $31 million. This was in the paper the other day. $31 million was allocated, and then $10 million of that was actually allocated for quote unquote emergency funding. That was about 7 months ago. We still haven't seen. So every transporting service, including Delta, was guaranteed up to $200,000. We actually just submitted our application in mid-December. Yeah, it's been about a month. We will be getting the $200,000, which is great. However, the scope of a multi-million-dollar budget, it doesn't go very far. And it wasn't what the recommendation was, which reflected the needs of the state. So Delta's sort of caught in this mix of climbing costs and decreasing revenue. And our biggest fault, and I'll offer a degree of transparency here, is that we were operating a deficit for quite a while with a reserve to kind of cushion that, but we don't have that reserve in. So we're kind of at a point where we need to reach a break-even point fairly quickly. Which I know has been a point. Everyone's seeing the climbing costs, and I think everyone expected the cost to rise. I don't think anyone expected the cost to rise as quickly as they are. And that's 100% due to when I stepped in and we took a quick look at the finances, and then we realized that there was an issue here. We knew we needed to take some drastic measures. So this being one of them. Before we discussed town subsidies, we did discuss whatever we could do internally to curb our costs. We've made some pretty significant administrative reductions. Four senior administrative positions have been cut. The roles have just been absorbed by who's left. We're not at a point where we can reduce staff. We're already operating basically at minimum staffing. And that is for the field providers and for administrative staff right now. Basically, we're at a point now where any further reductions would prompt a change in how we operate as a business. We'd have to make a pretty drastic change somewhere and shift our focus. But for the business model that we're doing now, which is a combination of transfer work and 911s, we're basically at a bare minimum staffing right now. So we have cut back on administrative staff. We're looking at the town subsidy increases. We're looking at offering our billing services. We're looking at a lot of different ways where we can use our current resources to either be more efficient or find additional sources of funding. The problem is with the $3 million gap, we can put dents in that, but it doesn't close the gap. And unfortunately, the loss in call volume that we experienced before was the biggest factor that we've experienced over everything. And that, in combination with all these rising costs, it's honestly put us in a bad position. And without any state funding coming in that's either timely or substantial enough to affect it, unfortunately, a lot of that burden is being put back on the towns. So we are doing our best right now to minimize what that final number is going to be. The 25 was decided on by our board of directors. We recommended that number, knowing that it still wasn't going to be enough to close that gap, but it was a step in the right direction. So I know everyone's asking, what is the final number going to be? And the honest answer right now is I don't know. I have a rough range of what it could be. On the very outside range, it's probably in the 70s, but I also recognize that's not a realistic number for the town to absorb. The best case number is probably down in the mid to high 30s. I think that's fairly appropriate for the service we want to provide. We want to continue doing transfers and 911s. And then there's a couple of different paths that are in the middle where we could potentially lose part of our operation. We could lose the transfer side of our operation and focus just on 911s. The problem with that is, though, a lot of our infrastructure is shared. So our infrastructure basically supports 911s and interfacility transfer work. So if we lose the revenue out of one side of that, it doesn't automatically equate to shaving half the cost of the operation off. So while we can get it lower than, let's say we can get it lower than the 70s, we're not going to get it all the way down to where I think it could be if we were able to find a better solution. So right now we are working with the hospitals. We've started some work with a couple of larger area services, and we're starting a collaborative effort with the hospitals to try to mitigate this increase. There's no way to avoid the increase, though. As we looked at, so back in October and November, when I started crunching these numbers, I wanted to make sure that before we went out and said anything, that we were basically in line with what was appropriate around the area, so that our numbers were consistent with what other people are finding also. Short answer is they are. I did do some comparisons here, and some of these have changed this year because actually other services have increased their budgets also. But as of a few months ago, these are the numbers. So, like the Blue Ribbon Commission said, everything is basically dependent on a combination of subsidy and call volume. So lower call volumes equal a higher subsidy requirement. Higher call volumes, you still need a subsidy, but it's just not quite as much. And that's basically because you need a certain amount of infrastructure no matter how many calls you do. So towns up in Washington County, they're sometimes pushing $80 to $100 or more per capita, or whatever the equivalent is, to provide the service. They still need a certain amount of ambulances to cover a certain square mileage, even though they're doing a very, very small number of calls that are generating any revenue for them. So their subsidy is a lot higher. When you move into a little bit closer to our area, that number drops a little bit because we're more populated. We're generally smaller coverage areas and higher call volumes. The town of Jefferson right now, just to provide some local reference, so the town of Jefferson right now is covered by two services. They're covered by the town of Waldoboro and Central Lincoln County Ambulance. Waldoboro, I believe, covers roughly 2/3 of the town, and Central Lincoln County covers the bottom third. They use a different formula. It's not a straight per capita, but they have a per capita equivalent that we just kind of calculated here, which is 65. And like I said, that's changed a little bit, but when I did this, it was $65 per capita is what they were paying based on their population with what those two services were charging. There's a service out in Western Maine, Medcare. They're based out of Mexico. They cover 11 towns in the western edge of the state. They're at $45 per capita. They are a similar operation to Delta. Palermo actually used to be covered by Delta. They were taken over by Liberty 2 years ago. They're paying $42 per capita. So that 40s to 60s number is, unfortunately, it's kind of the reality of the industry right now. There's really no way around. There's some local services, like I know Augusta Fire, they have a pretty low per capita number. If you just look at their per capita rates, I believe it's 18. But they also charge other things on top of that. And I spoke with Chief Croder, and he actually wasn't able to give me a firm number, but they charge a per capita, and they also charge bad debt. So basically whatever wasn't paid by insurance, they charge the towns for that the year after, a couple of years after. So I don't really know what it equates to. He guessed it was probably in the high 20s, mid to high 20s, but that was a rough guess. Waterville's in kind of the same situation. So they have a lower per capita requirement also, but they're also operating in a very tight geography with very high call volume. That doesn't really translate into what we do. So basically, Waterville, if you were to compare city to what we do, so Waterville's call volume just in the city is about what our call volume is across 13 towns. They cover that with 2 ambulances, and they're still sustaining a loss. We couldn't ever compete with that, but it's also not realistic to do because we can't take their 2 ambulances and expect to adequately or appropriately cover 13 towns with only 2 trucks. So the needs of what we're trying to do across 13 towns are just different than what you'd find in a smaller city. So unfortunately, like I said, the reality is the numbers kind of are what they are right now, and that's sort of been an industry standard, I guess, for a few years now. Delta's just late getting into this. It's kind of the bottom line here. When we started at 15, everyone's kind of laughing when I said this. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but 15 was basically decided on by our board of directors. It's almost like I guess you call it an introductory rate, recognizing that for 50 years, there was no charge at all. And to go from 0 to anything was going to be a pretty big pill to swallow. I don't know the specifics of all that because I wasn't involved in it, but I believe the projection was for an incremental increase of so many dollars per year up until a certain point, and I don't know if that target number was ever established. And going back to November when we started looking at this again, it was pretty obvious that 15 and an incremental increase was not going to be adequate to support us. We were kind of a critical juncture where we needed to make some pretty severe decisions in a short time to make sure that we were going to be sustainable. I know the Coney Road situation has come up. For anyone that doesn't know, we did put our Coney Road building up for sale, that's our southern station. So we have our headquarters up in Waterville. Our Coney Road station has been there since 2009 as our southern satellite. So Waterville station covers basically everything from like the halfway point, the north-south division line of China, Vassalboro, Sydney, and parts of Belgrade and Rome. So Waterville covers everything in the north, and Augusta generally covers everything in the south. When we were looking at all the company's finances, we needed to make some big corrections in order to stabilize the company for the next year or so. And unfortunately, selling an asset was the quickest and best method that we had to do that. There were two components to that. So one was actually an operational need, which was looked at several years ago, selling the Coney Road, and then for response times in our community, in the towns that we were covering, it made a little bit of sense to get rid of that one central point, two satellites actually in our coverage area, because actually the Coney Road's not in our coverage area at all. So there was an operational consideration, but the reason why it happened so quickly and when it happened was straight up, it was due to finances. So that being said, so we are looking at alternative sites. We don't have anything set in stone just yet. We're working on the Cooper's Mills area right now. That's still a work in progress. We haven't made any definitive moves down there. And until both those sites are located, we're going to continue to occupy the Coney Road site. And that property is due to close and be sold actually in a couple of days. And we'll be leasing that property month to month. So we're able to stay there and use that as long as we need to, which we intend to do. Our goal is not to make any changes that are going to negatively affect anybody's response times. That's the fastest I've ever gotten through this. You've listened to this a lot. So there are a lot of layers to the ambulance billing stuff. I actually don't have Vassalboro's numbers. I'm still working off a lot of these, but generally what we respond to, like I said, we only collect roughly half that. And going back to the ambulance transport part of it, where we're able to bill for transports only, we're not able to bill for non-transports. Some of that will be changing this year. Commercial insurance carriers are going to be required to pay us for some non-transports. I don't know how many of that. We'll have to kind of see how this year goes as to how much of a dent that actually makes, but I don't expect it's going to make a significant dent. So that's kind of where we are right now. And, I wish it was better news. The point I want to keep making is that this isn't an effort to get more money for the sake of getting money. We're looking at still achieving a break-even point when we are very far behind the curve right now. So, I apologize for the speed at which we're raising these per capita numbers, and hopefully our target number, which I expect to know within the next few months here, to give all the towns adequate time to plan for that. I'm hopeful it'll be in the lower end of that spectrum. I just can't say for sure right now. I don't think it'll be responsible to guarantee anything right now. Like I said, it's a range of probably low 30s to very high number in the 70s. But if it winds up being that number in the 70s, we're going to be making some internal operational changes so that it doesn't go that way. But that will affect service through the system. If we were going to accomplish that, it would probably mean dropping our transfer business, which would leave a very large vacuum as far as patient transports go. So, it's not just the money. I mean, we would be able to survive on 911 with still an increased subsidy. It would be a higher subsidy than if we were to continue doing transfers, but we could do it, but it would be still more of a burden to the towns. And the more severe implication of that is there wouldn't be transportation services for a lot of, we ran 6,000 calls, roughly 6,000 interfacility transfers, and most of those were local, coming out of either Inland Hospital, Thayer, or Augusta. So those are patients going to, they're going to rehab, they're going between facilities. Sometimes they're going to Portland or Eastern Maine for cardiac caths or stuff like that. So not saying no one would be around to do it, but right now Delta covers the bulk of that. So I don't want us to have to go down a road where we're looking at leaving that for someone else to take care of, because that's going to be a pretty significant burden for everyone to pick up. So hopefully we can find a solution somewhere in the middle here where we're still looking at an increased cost, but I think we're able to kind of come to a collaborative agreement here. I think we'll be able to minimize whatever that increase is.
There seems to be a petition going around amongst some of the 13 communities to force a $20 per capita. In the event that some of these towns decide that they're not willing to pay, how is that going to reflect on the remaining towns that stay? Because I mean, when I look at last year when Mr. Beals was here,
yep,
he projected that you guys needed $650,000 to fill the gap, and then a 66% increase. We're at 1.1 million.
Correct.
And then potentially looking at 2 million the following year for the remaining 13 towns to fill. If those 13 towns stay, with Vassalboro's probably looking at $110,000 this year and over $200,000 the following year, roughly.
Yeah, I got 110,475 according to the census numbers for this coming year.
So I'm just kind of curious where we stand there, and I'm also would like to know, you have the 13 towns that you're partners now. Other than the $300,000 that Maine General has recently committed to you folks, what are the hospitals giving?
Well, that's actually part of the collaborative program that I was talking about. So that will be a necessity moving forward. So we did have that discussion with the $15 per capita. I remember that conversation coming up with, what if a town doesn't want to pay? And the answer was, we wouldn't be able to provide service, and that's still going to hold true. For the towns that would be remaining, it wouldn't be fair for us to provide service to one town for free while still charging the remaining. So that would have to be reflected in what we did. And moving forward, we're going to basically be forced to take a similar stance with any of the transfer work we do also. So Maine General did provide a grant to us. However, it's a term grant. It's not a service agreement. It's only good for 6 months, and there's no guarantee. I don't expect that it's actually going to continue any beyond that. Whether we do transfers or 911s, we face the same problems in billing. What we get in revenue doesn't cover our operating costs. So I believe there's a shared cost right now between the municipalities and between any organization that we're doing transfers with or transfers from. So I believe there's got to be a way to balance that operational cost. The cost of readiness is the expensive part. So that's what we're looking for. That's how I'm hoping that we're going to minimize whatever this cost increase is. That's still a work in progress.
My frustration remains the same with the lack of communication over the last year or so on these increases. And to be frank, with 8 hospital trustees running the purse strings for your organization with 5 town communities with not a lot of say, I still, and I've shared this with you in an email, that we should. I like the collaboration effort with Delta. You guys have served Vassalboro for many years, many decades, but the towns need to have a stronger say in what's going on.
I agree. I don't know if you saw, I did respond to your email. So actually, I'm very supportive of that idea. I think, from my point of view, honestly, that makes it a little bit easier. Right now, I know how it's probably coming across. I think there's a lot of education that goes into this, is trying to explain the intricacies of how ambulance billing works, and it's really boring stuff, but it's kind of a necessary component to understand. And I think if officials from the towns or community members from the towns could be part of that process, kind of see the behind the scenes thing, I think it would make a little more sense, and then it's a little bit easier delivery. When these increases happen, there's some transparency built into the process. It's not just me saying I'm being transparent. It's there. So that's something that I would support. I just don't know. I don't know how that works yet. But it's something I'd like to move towards. I would agree with you. I think for the town, I think there should be more community seats on the board. I think reconfiguration is probably what we're doing at this point. But that's something I haven't had time to really look into yet. But it's something we will be looking at.
So if you folks come with us with a 25 as the target number, and throughout the town votes, through funding votes, there's some towns that drop off for whatever reason, is that going to be fixed for the year, or are you guys going to come back with a?
No, the 25 is fixed for this year.
Okay.
Yeah, that won't change this year. I am aware of the petition going around. All I can kind of offer here is that, we're still operating behind the curve. And so, like I said, this isn't an effort to get more money just for the sake of, we're not putting anything away right now. We're just trying to break even. So, if we're saying 25 isn't enough and 20 is the offer, it still means there's going to be more of an increase the following year. There's really no way to make the numbers work otherwise. We're looking at a timeline of where if we don't correct it and we continue to operate a deficit, that timeline eventually expires. So the longer we take to get to a break-even point, the shorter that timeline gets. That's what I don't want to have happen. But I am sensitive to the fact that, this is a pretty steep increase in a short amount of time with, I'll admit, not a lot of transparency over the last year. That's why I'm trying to be as open as possible right now to kind of bring people up to speed on what's been going on.
Any questions, man?
The satellite location you were talking about earlier?
Yep.
Is Winslow a candidate?
For a satellite location?
You're across the river and the bridge won't be fixed for 4 years.
Yeah.
The old town garage. It's a 4 or 5 bay garage. It's empty.
Well, if we're going to
It's
do,
privately owned.
yeah. So is a satellite location to replace the Coney Road, or?
Because you said most of your businesses.
Most of it is. However, most of our mutual aid requirements actually come from our southern towns, just because the geography is so spread out. So even though the call volume is higher in the northern end, where we have the hardest time covering is actually in the south. So having a truck down at the Coney Road, the Cooper's Mills spot, if you look on a map, is actually I won't call it out of position, but it's basically at the far edge of where we would consider something that's viable.
Okay. Just an idea.
Yeah.
The rates you charge for transfers, are those fixed by any governmental authority?
They are. So
I'll give you an example. I was a customer of yours in November. And on a non-emergency basis, they put me in the back of one of the vans, 2 drivers, one from there to Augusta. It was $1,400. X.
So without knowing exactly what the services were, I won't ask. So basically all the
services are both.
Well, they wouldn't both be in the front seat.
They were.
There's nobody in the back with you?
Put me in, locked me down, strapped me in, and says, "See you at the other end."
You can talk after me.
Yes, that's private. Yeah.
So basically ambulance billing, regardless of it's in the transfer 911, it always falls under 2 things, base rate and mileage. So the base rate is basically the category of the bill that are missing. Yep. So everything's set by Medicare. So Medicare sets the ground rules for everything. So there's different base rates, and those are also established by Medicare. So where we set our prices, and this is where that write-off, that 52% write-off comes in. So some insurance companies, and any ambulance service can do this, but some insurance companies will offer contracts with different transporting services. I believe we're a contract with 3 or 4.
Chris, we digress too much.
So I asked Chief Matt from the rescue and Chief Walker for the fire department to come to offer any suggestions or comments if they had. I'm not putting you on the spot, but if you have any comments, here's a chance.
No, I don't have any comments. I mean, the crews that are responding to town are competent, taking care of us. In Augusta Rescue maybe 5 times in the last 3 or 4 months, but any system gets overloaded, so that's not a concern. Operationally on the field, I don't have.
Chief Walker, any concerns?
No. One thing, if you guys do set up in Cooper's Mills, that would be responsible for the south end of Vassalboro. Is that correct?
No, not quite. So the response zones would have to shift a little bit.
Okay.
So we're in that. So if we use Cooper's Mills, it would either be for temporarily along with Coney Road, or eventually we'd like to get rid of Coney Road because it's actually costing us a little bit more now than the month before. So we'll be looking at a spot somewhere in the hospital vicinity. We'd like to keep it kind of close to that Route 3 overpass. So the final plan, if we go through with that part, will be Waterville, Cooper's Mills, or somewhere in the general area, and something on the other side of the river. So southern Vassalboro will more than likely be covered by the one that's in the hospital area.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
You have anything else you'd like to offer or share?
I didn't give numbers before, just real quick, and this might not be completely. So we had 153 non-transports, and of those, 8 calls by our records were mutual aid. So I believe Augusta Fire was the majority of those. And we had 335 911 calls that we did transport. So the breakdown was about 70-30. It's pretty consistent.
You all set, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I encourage anybody, if you have any questions, to forward them to Aaron, and appreciate you taking the time to come give your spiel. Thank you.
If you want to reach out, shoot me. I'm curious, Nick. You got it? Okay.
The work you do is good work. It's not really yours.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you, Fred.
We'll find out who's here for the public hearing, and then we might be able to get John out of here, or do you want to just go right to that? Who's here for the public hearing other than,
I don't know. Code enforcement officers here. We have any applicants here.
okay. All right, so we're gonna move on to open up a public hearing for the marijuana business licensing.
So we have 5 applicants. Leo Barnett, owner of 4 marijuana cultivation facilities located on Old Meadows Road. Dan Charest, marijuana cultivation facility at 8 Cushnick Road. Colin Dorsey, same at 55 Old Meadows Road, 55A Old Meadows Road. Hayden Pupis operating a medical marijuana cultivation facility at 56 Old Meadows Road, and William Cunningham operating the same at 55B and 61 Old Meadows Road. Mr. Cunningham has been asked to install a security system over there, which he expects to be done, I think the CEO said next month. All 3, the police chief, fire chief, CEO recommend approval with the condition that Mr. Cunningham installs security cameras as promised. Code enforcement officers here, if you have any questions of him about this process or anything he's seen out there.
Do you have any comments or insight?
No, I recommend that.
Is the security one a contingent license, or is that?
I think you could put it as a condition, and then I could report to the town manager that they're in compliance with my recommendation. I've seen that they have a contract, they have seen the estimate, and showed me the email when they're looking to install early February.
We can't do anything about that yet. It's set
Change them, you'll be forthcoming, we approve this.
for next year. Can't do anything about this year. Any other questions for code enforcement? We have a motion to close the public. Did anybody else have any comments on that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Are all of those licenses for people that existed prior to the ordinance being,
Yes.
so they've been here all that time? Originally,
Well, there seems to be 5 of the original 8. I don't know what has transpired with the other 3,
well,
but
5 of them was big. Question on the Cushnick Road, that facility, unless I'm mistaken, is not being utilized at this point. There were no licensed businesses in that facility. There cannot be any further licenses in that facility because they didn't exist when the ordinance was passed. Why would you license the facility?
Can you explain which one that is?
I think it's Charette.
Daniel Charest.
That's one that burned, right?
Yes, that was a grow that was grandfathered for the ordinance. And then of course he had that fire.
Yeah, for the building, yes, but he's not, there's no operation in there.
Correct, not at the moment, but
So
they,
nobody can start, nobody can create a business there because they weren't grandfathered.
so the previous growers, and Jason, I don't want to step on your toes here, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So the previous growers that were in there during the fire are moving back in as soon as he gets that building up and running. And they were grandfathered prior to the ordinance. Is that correct, Jason?
That's my understanding. It wasn't part of my doing. It was previous to my tenure here, but that's my understanding is that there was some communication from the code office to Dan that they would be grandfathered to until things got rolling and they got back into where he's at now. So I'm not sure. Is there anything in the ordinance that requires an annual review?
so there is I think it's subsection J, if I recall, that talks about that if there's a fire or some kind of damage,
If they haven't licensed, if they lost their ability to do business.
as long as they documented or contacted the town of the reasons why they weren't, in this case, the fire would have been
Each year.
which was last year, correct?
The fire was in late fall.
October of 22.
So it's been more than a year. I don't know if there's a legal way that they can enter, they can start doing business again. And I guess I'm not sure that the ordinance stresses that.
And I know we have correspondence from the former code enforcement officer that basically says that they're grandfathered. So
You do?
I would, oh yeah, you've seen it, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
in all fairness, if this is the way the town wants to move on that applicant, I believe it should have been dealt with before he rebuilt and spent all that money on that
Right.
structure. And he did that based on what was told to him, that he was grandfathered.
You know, if the town is,
Yeah.
if they have documentation that shows that, I'm fine with that. I just,
Yeah.
you know, if the thing is sat vacant and there's been no activity and no interest in it, then I think it's a different story. The way you're describing
I don't think there's an occupancy permit yet, is there?
No, Walker and I met with Dan 2 weeks ago, and they had stopped construction and were looking to get back on it. I don't believe they're there yet. Once they're back on site, they're looking to finish it and then have the town come in and do the final inspection. And that can all be part of the condition for the licensing also.
This involved legal too, I believe. This discussion and carrying forward, so it's been vetted through council, my understanding, his council and ours, I believe.
Yeah.
I don't see it as
Yeah,
an issue.
yeah.
Good question
As
though.
long as the town is good that there's some trail.
Do we have any other questions on seeing none?
Motion to exit public hearing.
Second, all those in favor? All right, so we have a motion to make motion to accept the code enforcement's recommendation to move forward with relicensing of the five.
So Leo Barnett, Dan Shrest, Colin Dorsey, Hayden Pupis, William Cunningham, with the stipulation that security cameras be installed at the facility.
As a condition, all right, as stated by the town manager.
You make the motion?
Yep.
6, 7.
All those in favor? Okay, 2-0. All right. Sorry, John, for the wait.
I'll be merciful on you. First of all, I'm not speaking about the historical society tonight. Doug plans to be in front of you in 2 weeks, and it was our intention, and the email that you got doesn't mention the historical society. It's all about trails. And so just to cut to the quick, we're looking for a little bit of guidance, the Trails Committee, whether there's an aspiration on the town's part to improve the trail and focus on what we propose anyway, is focusing on the eastern loop. If you're familiar with that, it starts really at the parking lot by the Public Works Garage, which is great, brand new, nice, and then pops out in the middle of the soccer field. You could do this in stages, you could do it all at once. You know, if you've got an appetite for it, we'd like to know, as opposed to just sort of spinning our wheels. And most everything we've done is pretty much volunteer up till now. You do provide us $1,000, and we've asked that be $1,100, but this would be in a different category if you decided to improve the trail. So
After reviewing the email that John gave, I mean, we have a few dollars left in ARPA funds, and I think, the last 3 years we've made an effort to try to have some outdoor activities for the citizens of the town. I'd be in favor of
These are improving the system.
yes, or just I'd be in favor of considering.
Which option?
Top of my head, it was a bit, the original one was talked about having the gravel base right through the
for that half mile.
Yeah.
And I think there's a way to cut some of those costs down to focus, if you're limited in terms of what you can do. Our interest would be getting out of the water and mud and getting rid of the bog bridging that we've got there, which becomes a hazard over time. So they break and then people get their feet caught. So if you had an interest, if you could have a place saver for us and we could do a little more work to fine tune the number.
how much time do you need, John?
Probably be ready in 2 weeks, I think. The guy I've been talking to has been very helpful to me. And spoken out.
Do you want to come back in a couple of weeks and then or to either next meeting or the meeting afterwards?
Yeah, and the other way to do it is if you could say, well, ballpark, here's what we think we could put into it, and then what can you get for us for that?
What are your thoughts, Mike? You have an interest in this as well.
Yeah. Northwood looking eastern low PA is the easiest because you want to remove those 2 log bridges.
Yeah,
we had talked about just you and I hauling the gravel there.
Yep.
Which is supplied by the town, is sitting there, over there.
right. And then
That's almost at no cost.
so the issue is,
The railroad bed.
he and I have been using our own personal tractors to go on in there.
Mhm.
But you fill a bucket full of gravel and then you go on uneven terrain and you're just asking for trouble. We don't have the ideal equipment to be doing what we're doing. We've done a lot, moving wood chips is a whole lot different in terms of stability because of the weight you're carrying than moving gravel. And so, we can do it a teaspoon at a time and be safe. But
What does skid steer work?
Huh?
What does skid steer work?
yeah, Brian says it should be a track, right?
Has to be.
Because you got the mud in there, so you're just gonna get bogged down pretty quick with it. And those places, there probably should be, the silt fabric put down.
And the key is a cheap way is to easement. The $14,000 proposal is to go up the railroad bed
No,
further than we want.
the 14,000 is to do the gravel for everything on the half mile.
Okay.
And I'm just telling you that you could opt to say, hey, we want you to focus on the wet spots. What would that cost us? On that half mile, and then another year you could decide, hey, this is pretty good. We'd like to finish it off with that same treatment on the rest of it. The other issue is, yes, you mentioned the rail bed is a gravel bed. But it was allowed to grow to forest. And so there are stumps in it. Yeah, there's some big ones and, those low. To me, it would take a half day's effort for a stump grinder to come in and clean those up and then to figure out a way to scarify the surface and bring it back to a gravel surface. So that seems more doable and, financially than this other idea of, actually improving it where it's really wet.
So we're refining options in 2 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you want,
Come back and give you some options.
Yeah.
All right.
that way Rick will be here, so.
Yep.
Appreciate your time, John.
We used to have 80 grand.
60 something.
Way back.
Yeah.
No.
Brian?
Yeah.
I understand that you'd like to talk to, on behalf of Public Works.
Yeah, I have some leftover paving money that I would like to use to pave some dirt roads, stuff that we spend a lot of time, like this one we just had chasing our tail, running around with the sand truck costs and cost a lot of money to do that. It takes us when we should be spending more time on a main road tending to them.
What roads were you looking?
Down road, mile pond. I also did an integrated therapy study. John had asked about repaving that. There's a lot more year-round residents.
Got the money, wouldn't do it.
Brian, I have reservations from the standpoint that last year's board initially supported the idea of doing this, and then through the process with the budget committee, we agreed at that point that we would refrain from expanding the paving program. And with a significant amount, I think we have $140,000 left over. I'm really in favor of carrying over a large part of that for next year's budget. It's not that I don't agree with it, but I just think it's based on the negotiations that we had going into the last year's budget process, that it's just best to stick with that and then reconsider it down the line for me personally.
You got 80 and you want 14.
What's the question?
So you have a balance of 80 now.
That's 140,000.
142.
Yeah. Okay.
He's got 124.
And you want to roll it in.
I just want to note that when these discussions happened with the budget committee, there was basically came to an agreement to cut back on this. But and you did do that. I mean, there was Gene put in for the dirt roads. The budget committee and the select board came to a consensus to try to reduce the amount, and they did do that. But what happened is that the paving came in at a lower number, and the number that you're seeing here has nothing to do with the reduction. This was based on the numbers that came in. Right. I just, I don't know if you were able to show that photo of the road the other day, Mill Road. I mean, they're chasing their tail here. I mean, they're going out three times a day to some of these roads. It's. If I wish I could pull up the photo here, but it's it's a really treacherous looking photo, and I mean,
And you have to have on the same road too.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, the dirt road, yeah.
They have a fire call, EMS call. Because when we're out there, we're on the same, when we hear a fire call, EMS call, somebody headed that direction. Make the road safe.
so I'd be curious to see like what, in your opinion, would be, you know, like from a safety standpoint, you know, I mean, that road in particular, it dips down quite a bit. I wouldn't want to be pulling an engine down there. I wouldn't want to drive a plow truck down there or anything. I wouldn't drive a car down there. So I'm wondering if, you know, if we can look at that and then maybe revisit this as we move forward through the end of the fiscal year to see how things are going with the budget. I understand that if you put that money in to undesignated fund, you know, we can ask the town if they want to take that money out of the undesignated fund to help reduce the, you know, the overall commitment
We
towards
should be able
that.
to carry forward this in the exact same process for next year for paving.
Well, you can if you're if it would have to pass a straight face test as far as, you know, is this work that the auditors have explained to me that you can do that, but it needs to be moved for something that didn't basically get done. And I don't think that would be the case anyway. I just wondering if it's worth revisiting as we move towards the end of the fiscal year and see how things are going with spending, and, you know, because we know we got to keep that bottom dollar, you know, and who knows what kind of surprises can crop up.
Plus, we also get to figure in, our summer maintenance. You know, the time we spend grading roads, put gravel in that we could replace like a plow out during the winter, you know, there's a lot of expense there too.
When do you need a firm decision on this?
Do I need her?
June 30.
I'd like to have him before that, so I can make sure I get the paving guy scheduled in, do that, get him, you know, as soon as he put him on the list, so we can do it right out this spring.
It's gonna be a moot point because I'm not gonna vote for it. So if you want to wait for Rick to come back and bring it back, that's up to you,
Can we
but
get them on remote access?
no, we don't have policy.
No, I don't need to
Go
know,
ahead,
I don't
Don.
need to know today.
Right.
Are there any other costs associated other than paving to get these roads to stand at the paving?
No, they're pretty much all ready to
They'll
go.
be ready to pave?
Just a matter of taking a day or two, grading them, so they can pave.
Good question. Yeah.
Can we have-
I mean, I just think we have an opportunity. I mean, we spend $500,000 every year on the 42 miles or so that we have now. And, you know, if we can take 20% out of next year's budget,
That's beat it. Yeah, I understand your point.
um,
Okay, you're against it, I'm for it, so we're gonna wait for it.
Yep. Great, so-
Let's move on.
all right. Sorry, Brian.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Now, we were asked to, in December, when we were discussing this, we had scheduled to have a discussion the first meeting in January, and it was brought to our attention that we failed to have a public comment on the public hearing. Public comment period on the public hearing policy. So the person that brought it up is not here, but I will open it up for anybody that would like to comment on any potential changes to the public comment policy. If anybody from the audience wishes to. Okay, doesn't appear to be any comments, so we're ready for signatures. That's two's fine. And we also have to sign the I know these are the
You got a form, so you're good.
those are the licenses.
Is that at the end?
What happened to our television?
They're right there.
It's a serious question.
It's in the corner.
It's a work in progress.
We can turn it on and pull up the website. All this stuff should be on the website, most of it.
Sorry, so scheduled public hearings. So one of the things that we've been moving forward over the winter is updating the solid waste ordinance, the marijuana ordinance, and considering changes to the TIF ordinance. So we'll have to schedule out public hearings for these to be done. What are your thoughts, Aaron?
So thinking solid waste ordinance, February 22nd, public hearing, and marijuana ordinance, March 7th.
Okay.
That gives some time for the June 3rd, 2024 town meeting. Just the thought being that solid waste is pretty much dialed in. I think we've kind of reached all that, and marijuana, it'd be nice to have a little more time to work on that one. So
How do you feel about that? Okay, we don't need a motion for that, do we?
no, it's fine. I just want to get a sense of when you wanted to have that.
Yep, that works for me.
Okay.
I just make a comment. The marijuana ordinance that's on the website
Mhm.
is missing, I think, 2 or 3 pages.
Okay.
Okay.
It's only it's very partial. Not the whole thing. I know you haven't really sat and gone through and
Okay.
lined it, but it's, you know, to bring that up to look at it, it's not all right.
Oh, that's weird. Was it that we just carried it over? Was it that way before?
I don't know.
You know, okay.
Well,
Where the pages were double-sided, but only one side got scanned in.
yes, that's, I think what happened.
Okay.
This is the one that's under the proposed one, the one that the marijuana ordinance that's the ordinance under the ordinance list is fine. It's the one that you put under your agenda for the meeting.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And I suspect that you're gonna make some changes.
Gotcha.
Probably not critical.
Thanks, sir.
Any other comments?
Did you have a date? If
Good question. Done.
So how do we leave that? We did talk about that. The TIF ordinance, we're standing by.
So I think the thought process is we need to review, special town,
Yeah, I think
to change the policy.
that's priority, is to get the special town meeting dialed in. I mean, we may actually see that in place of it, before our annual town meeting.
But you still have a public hearing.
Sure. Yeah, you'd have a public hearing on an ordinance. Absolutely. We're required to do so.
Was that no special town meeting, something that you did as a policy?
This was done years ago.
Might have been when Don was on the board.
What would you call it?
You need a
Special
quorum.
town meeting? I don't remember them ever.
I think it was from the nineties,
no, I really don't remember.
I think it's a quorum requirement.
120.
Yeah,
Right.
25 people.
It is.
Yeah, there is a fairly substantial form.
Yeah.
The last-
I mean, you can have it. It's just the thought that you want to move forward, and are we gonna get 125 people? No.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's that uncertainty, I think.
That's,
Wasn't it based off like a presidential election or
Yeah.
elections?
yeah, and it exceeds.
It's a number. It's not 10% of the gubernatorial. It's an actual number, 125.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, because we had 21 night, 2,190, I think, at the last one. Gubernatorial, I think it was, because I know you need 219 for a petition, force the vote.
Mhm.
So I don't think the numbers jive. I think it's a number they put forth at the time.
So to change that, you have that go to town meeting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Rick knows the history of it. I don't, of course Rick would.
It just surprised me when the statement was made earlier that
It might even gone back to the 50s.
It's odd.
It was a way.
Something happened. Somebody didn't like it. So they moved forward with that, as my guess.
with the forum.
Yeah, they moved forward
If
with
you
it.
have a forum, you call a meeting and hopefully get a forum.
Mm,
'Cause I think there was, I remember Mary talking about it being in doubt initially for the marijuana ordinance review, 2020 or what have you.
Well, it's hard to get that.
I'll follow up with you on the next meeting, with this quorum discussion.
All right. We're all set there. We'll move on to minutes. I had a few that I wanted to talk about. How about you, Mike? All right. On section 4, we discussed adding a 500-gallon propane tank out back if we went forward with the generator. In same section,
Remember that?
Rick discussed the town managers reaching out to state surplus to see if there was any 3-phase
I did do that.
generators.
Yeah.
It just wasn't documented.
Okay, I did do that, by the way.
Number 9, town manager was asked to consider adding a credit card machine at the transfer station. And then also in the same section, the town manager was asked to ascertain if we could transfer funds from the escrow account to a higher yield bond from the sale of the South Stanley Hill Road. Did you get an answer on that, by the way?
No. With the transfer station, the credit card, that's being worked on, but I in all transparency, I did not check into a higher yield bond. I'll have to follow up with you on that. Thank you for pointing that out.
Anything else, Mike, that you? Okay, do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
So move.
As with the changes? All right, second, all those in favor, 2-0.
Aye.
Okay, and then we got the town reports, we got town manager and the road report. Anything that you want to bring up? Yeah, I'm all set. Do we have a motion to accept the town report and the road report?
We should give a big thank you to the road people.
Mm.
Working their tailgates off.
You guys do good work. Appreciate you guys out there all hours of the night.
It has to be recognized occasionally.
For sure.
And as firefighters, we appreciate you cleaning up the aprons and the walkways. Thank you.
All right, so do we have a motion to accept the town manager and road report?
So moved.
All those, a second, all those in favor, 2-0. All right, other items that may be presented by the town manager or the select board.
Oh, I just wanted to follow up with you about our meeting, our task force meeting on Tuesday. Well, some of the members of the task force, myself, George from the transfer station. Jeff Senders was there. I thought it was a real productive meeting. It was interesting. He said that the magic number was 8 as far as the presentations of ideas. Remember he said that?
Number of
iterations and so anyway, it was a really helpful meeting. He showed up at, no charge for that discussion. And everyone agreed that it made sense to move forward with Jeff's services. He said, I think maybe April or May, he would have something for the task force to consider.
There's
three different ideas. He was real helpful. I mean, we had our idea and he expanded that and gave us some other ideas. And, we made it clear that, if we were to go through with this, we don't want to lock ourselves into any real position. I made sure that I did mention phase 2 with the possibility of other ideas, scale, what have you. Dan Bradstreet brought up, the size of he wasn't there for the meeting, but during our discussions, he talked about having, like a tractor trailer in there, and maybe there's other ways that we could handle our trash. So we don't want to have a footprint that locks us in to just the way we're doing our operations right now. What else? What am I missing?
scales.
Yeah. So for scales, for example, if he did scales, one of the great things, and he mentioned it in his proposal, is that he does have experience with administering grants and working, and he knows people to call. And I have a few ideas as well. So, we understand that getting grant money is going to be a huge part of this process. And not only that, it's also promising that for getting grant funds for this type of project. My recommendation of the crew that was there is to move forward with the services. So I guess I'd seek that approval tonight.
We asked them to consider keeping the transfer station open. You're digging up that place, moving those 2 compactors. Got to stay in business somehow. So we asked for clearance for that. Might be only the open top.
So you felt good about the
He was not afraid of the project at all.
No, said got a warm and fuzzy feeling. It's he likes doing. He's very busy. I mean, he's on the coast. The flooding that happened down there is keeping him very busy, and I got a good feeling about he likes doing community projects because it's anyway. He just enjoys it. He's his total cost for professional services is $7,600. That doesn't include geotechnical and structural engineering services.
did he give a price on that? Because that was one of the questions.
No, we didn't discuss that. I think that's if he said, well, he just says in his letter he'll communicate that information to the town with separate proposals because it'd be additional services. But what we're looking at now is mapping and base map creation. Estimated cost is $1,200. He'd be using an unmanned aerial vehicle to create existing conditions base map for permitting and design, preliminary design and grant administration. The estimated cost is $3,800. Final design and permitting, which is $2,600. It's preliminary plan. The town has been active in the past in looking at a transfer station, so there's quite a bit of information that's already on hand from, I believe, CES Engineering. And so I asked George before I left, to get together with Jeff and give him as much information as he can to really help facilitate this process. So it's good.
You want to move to a
Pretty good
vote?
session. Even Doug liked it.
Okay.
So he's gonna come back with, would you say, 3 proposals?
3 proposals, and it's probably going to take 8 before
And with
before you.
these, will come preliminary costs, or is it wait?
What's that?
With these
Costs?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's the purpose, Don, is, when we went down this path, the thought is, we get a group together, we talk about what we think it is that we need over there. Safety is an issue, and that's what sparked this with this discussion with this group, was people backing in. And so but in order for us to really, discuss it with the town, we need to know what it's going to cost. Right. And so, we just don't want to. Right. So anyway,
So we've been working on Don for a year now. I think we've had this committee going from. So we've had meetings with DEP over there and a few other stakeholders to figure out what is the best way to get, at least on stage 1 of the proposal, to have a drive-through MSW or a waste.
Right.
Whether or not that's a building or not, that's to be determined. Some of the things that were brought up by Mr. Parker, who was at the time, I think, the director of the division of the DEP when he came over. He's no longer there. One of the downsides of having a covered building is where it's so close to the capped landfill that there's a methane gas problem. So that would increase the cost to have the fire resistant electrical devices that might be in the building, like lights or fans and stuff. So inventing. So we have, we decided with some of this ARPA funds that it was best to kind of see what's available. Also, at least when we had our conversation with the DEP, because we identified a safety issue, the transfer station is not grandfathered by any of the rules after 1989. They'd be willing to waive the variance if we stay within 100 feet of the current location. So we're just seeing what's available.
We also charged Dr. Sanders with the concept to keep it flexible, because right now we think we know what we want, but what are we going to want 10 years from now? After we just plug in. How are we doing it?
And there's a real concern over the last 2 years. We've been running our waste to Norwalk, and this, whatever's been going on in Hamden's been a project. And we haven't been doing any type of recycling or diversion. And so that also came up as something we might look forward to. But we're very limited in the current location with setbacks. It's 500 feet from the closest house, 250 feet from the current boundary, 150 feet from the road. And then we have the transfer station, the old. So it's not an ideal location to do a lot with. So I need to make a statement before we make a vote. So just so everybody understands, I grew up with Jeff. I have not talked to Jeff personally since we graduated high school in 1997. There's no financial benefit from this relationship. No conflicts. So I just wanted to put that out there before we voted.
Have to make that statement.
Are you looking at using capitals for this instead of ARPA? Okay.
So are they looking at recycling the cardboard? No,
That's required now.
is it?
Yeah.
So you need to get a couple presses or something?
No, they just throw it in a big box,
Oh,
40-foot trailer.
When we
We used to do a newspaper. And we'd share that with China, but I think that would.
when we bought the new compactors, we also replaced the actual containers. So we took the old container that was with the old compactor and replaced the one that we were renting for the cardboard. And I think we actually, I don't even know if we get the fees for the cardboard, because it was from some years we have to pay, some years we make money. So I think it's just negotiated in the transport contract.
They're all away from us.
Yeah.
But we get nothing for it.
Well, I didn't think it, I'm not talking about that big, ones that make fails. No, if you're looking for any of them, I have two. They're nice. People bought it, put it in the mill, use it, and then they up and left. So I got two nice trailers.
Much.
Cheap. It's cheap. I just want to get them out. There's a vertical one and a horizontal.
All right, let's accept it.
Okay, we want to make a motion. So we're gonna make a motion to accept Dr. Sender's bid.
Yes,
Okay,
in the amount of
7,600. All right, I second that. All those in favor? All right. Is there anything else, Aaron, that you wish to discuss?
Becky, you good? I'll follow up with you. You good? Are you just here to, are you here for sanitary district or are you just here for?
Yes and no.
I just,
That's all right.
see, I did get your request
Yeah.
about TIF. And I forwarded it to legal for review. So
Okay, you haven't heard that one yet.
I just got it. I just sent it yesterday. I just got it yesterday.
Hey. Okay. not a
Okay,
problem.
all right.
Put a stamp on it, Becky.
Hey, he's overwhelmed too, you know?
So the only two things that I wanted to discuss, and I wish I'd asked Jason before he left. So a month or so ago, we had a public hearing on junkyards, and there were a couple that were not accepted. I'm just curious what the status is of those
Okay.
delinquent.
Yeah. We'll have to adjust that. Yeah.
And now the other thing can wait. It's not anything of importance we need to discuss right now. Anything else you need to bring? Anything else from the audience? All right. And now we just need
Are you gonna say them?
need a motion for the warrants. What are we doing for warrants?
It's 45, 46, 47, 48.
And you guys and another person who should remain unnamed. Mr. Corporation.
All right, I make a motion to accept warrants 45, 46, 47, 48.
Oh,
All right, all those in favor? All right. We'll get those signed.